Before we dive into this crazy story, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Are you tucked away in a cozy town in Vermont, living it up in a bustling high-rise in Tokyo, or relaxing by a sunny beach in California? I love seeing just how far these wild Karen tales of chaos and karma can reach. The sun had barely climbed high enough to warm the quiet suburban street, yet the morning was already heavy with tension. A faint scent of freshly cut grass mingled with a sharp tang of wet cement, turning the familiar neighborhood into something resembling a war zone. In the driveway of a modest brick house, a silver sedan sat under the unforgiving glare of daylight, its sleek surface completely obscured by thick, gray cement. Every inch, from the hood to the wheels, was coated in a gloppy, dripping mass, the edges still wet, forming grotesque rivulets along the car's contours. The sight was so absurdly surreal that for a moment it felt like the world had turned upside down. Standing near the driver's side were two women, both in their 40s, each clearly carrying themselves with the arrogance of someone convinced they could bend the world to their will. The taller one, Barbara, with a mane of platinum blonde hair that seemed almost luminous in the sun, clutched a battered metal bucket with cement residue smeared along its rim. Her blue jeans were speckled with gray, and her light-colored blouse clung to her like a uniform of mischief. She laughed, a loud, gloating sound that bounced off the brick facades of the surrounding homes. Beside her stood Brenda, slightly shorter, her dark hair pulled back, her round face flushed with excitement. She doubled over, hands on her knees, laughing in tandem with her sister, her white loose pants and brown blouse dotted with gray flecks of their handiwork. The man standing opposite them could hardly believe his eyes. 35, average build, but not fragile, with a face that usually exuded calm pragmatism. He now felt something entirely different, shock laced with fury. He had left his sedan parked innocently the night before, unaware that it would become the canvas for an act so brazen and so personal. The cement weighed down the car like a slab of punishment, its sticky texture congealing in every crevice, as if mocking him. He could hear the faint sound of dripping as it hardened unevenly along the doors and roof, and the stench of wet concrete clung to the air, filling his nostrils with a bitter, suffocating sharpness. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice cracking somewhere between disbelief and rage. His hands clenched at his sides, fingernails digging into palms as he tried to maintain control. The two women merely tilted their heads, exchanged smirks, and laughed harder. Barbara flicked a glance at him, eyes sparkling with a mix of mockery and triumph. "Relax," she said, voice syrupy with condescension. "It's just a little fun. Don't take life so seriously." Brenda added, her laughter still bubbling. "Yeah, it's not like cement is going to ruin you forever." The absurdity of their words made his blood boil. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a declaration of dominance, a carefully executed insult. He stepped closer, trying to gauge whether there was any logic or reason behind their actions. "Fun? Do you call this fun? My car, my property. You think you can just ruin it for a laugh?" His tone rose, carrying across the manicured lawns, drawing the curious glances of neighbors emerging from behind their curtains and porches. Barbara's smirk widened. "Maybe we can make it fun for both of us," she said, tipping the bucket slightly, letting a small drip fall onto the driveway in a soft plop. Brenda laughed, reaching down to smear a bit along the side of the wheel, making the surface slick and grotesque. The sisters had perfected their choreography, moving with an almost choreographed arrogance, knowing full well that they were in control, that the man across from them could do nothing in this moment. He felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just the destruction of a vehicle. It was an affront to his life, a symbol of entitlement and disregard for others he couldn't ignore. For a brief moment, he considered confronting them physically, but the ridiculousness of the situation tempered that impulse. Any rash action would likely escalate things further, and he needed a clear head. He stepped back, taking in the scene as a whole, the dripping cement, the mocking laughter, the way the sisters seemed to revel in the humiliation of the moment. His mind raced, replaying the events leading up to this morning. The subtle tension in the neighborhood had been building for weeks. He had noticed Barbara and Brenda's increasing audacity, parking across his driveway, blocking his guests, loud arguments over trivial matters that should have remained private. He had tried patience, smiling through their provocations, waiting for them to mature or at least respect boundaries. But their sense of entitlement had only grown, culminating in this grotesque display. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had obliterated it. A neighbor peered from behind a curtain, a frown etched across their face. The man gestured vaguely at the cemented sedan, silently hoping someone would intervene, but the street remained eerily quiet. It was as if the world had collectively paused, waiting to see his next move, waiting to see how he would respond to the audacity in front of him. Barbara noticed the neighbor and laughed even harder, feeding off the attention, like a performer drawing energy from an audience that wasn't supposed to exist. He took a slow, measured breath, trying to center himself. The cement glistened in the sun, a cruel mirror of his simmering anger. Every drip, every uneven layer, every streaked window felt like a personal insult. He thought about the hours he had spent maintaining the vehicle, the long drives, the memories associated with it. It was more than a car, it was a part of his life, now desecrated by two people who seemed to think they could do anything without consequence. You really think this is funny, he said, voice lower now, more controlled. But you're making a mistake. Big one. He could see the flicker of curiosity, a momentary pause in their laughter, as if his calm intensity introduced a variable they hadn't anticipated. Barbara raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. A mistake? Oh, honey, the only mistake here is you taking life so seriously. Brenda smirked, nodding in agreement, but there was a subtle hesitation in her movement, a crack in the armor of their arrogance. He forced a chuckle, but it came out hollow, more a mask for the calculation forming in his mind than genuine amusement. If he was going to get through this, he needed strategy, leverage, a way to turn the absurdity into opportunity. He realized quickly that direct confrontation would not work. The sisters thrived on chaos, fed by arrogance and a sense of invincibility. He needed patience, precision, and perhaps the involvement of forces larger than neighborhood gossip. Barbara tilted her head, scanning his face as if trying to read an emotion she could exploit. Well, are you just going to stand there staring at your fancy car? Or are you going to do something? Her words dripped with challenge, mocking his paralysis. Brenda nudged her sister, adding with a teasing lilt, "Yeah, come on. Don't just sulk. It's morning. Time to enjoy yourself." Their laughter, light and mocking, contrasted painfully with the weight of the cemented sedan, anchoring him to the absurdity of the situation. The man clenched his fists, feeling the tension crawl up his spine. He looked at the cemented windows and then back at the sisters. Somewhere beneath the shock, a spark ignited. Not rage, not panic, but clarity. This wasn't about anger. It was about justice. They had overstepped, not just socially, but legally, morally, and personally. He knew he couldn't let this slide. He had to act, but carefully, because impulsivity here would only play into their hands. A soft breeze carried the scent of cement toward him, sharp and almost choking, and he noticed a bird hopping nervously across the neighbor's lawn. Everything seemed to hold its breath in that suspended moment. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down, the cement, the sisters, the quiet suburb, the watching neighbors, all pieces in a puzzle he had yet to solve. Then, almost imperceptibly, a smile crept across his face, not a smile of amusement, but of strategy. He straightened his posture, squared his shoulders, and let his gaze sweep over the scene one last time. Barbara and Brenda, still giggling, hadn't realized that their arrogance had blinded them to the consequences looming just beyond their imagination. The man pulled out his phone and began documenting everything. The dripping cement, their faces frozen in gloating expressions, the absurdity of the tableau in high-resolution video. Every laugh, every smear, every triumphant glance was captured. He wasn't just preparing for confrontation. He was preparing for leverage, for a plan that would turn this nightmare upside down. Barbara noticed him fiddling with the device and squinted, suspicion flaring briefly. "What are you doing now? Taking selfies? Documenting your misery?" Her tone was mocking, but the undercurrent of unease was there, fleeting but noticeable. Brenda laughed, though slightly more hesitantly this time, brushing her hand over her blouse to wipe away some of the cement residue. The man pocketed the phone, walking around the car with a measured pace, his eyes never leaving the sisters. He took note of every detail, the texture of the cement, the angle of the buckets, the expressions frozen on their faces. Every element would be important for what came next. He felt the tension in the air like a live wire, thick and buzzing, promising that the morning was far from over, and yet he knew that he held the first piece of the solution. Finally, he stepped back to the curb, hands in his pockets, shoulders squared. The cemented car loomed between him and the sisters like a monument to their arrogance. Yet he didn't flinch. The neighbors peeked cautiously from behind windows, sensing the gravity of the moment. Barbara and Brenda, still confident, didn't yet realize that this standoff was far from a simple morning prank. With one last glance at the cemented sedan and the sisters laughing beside it, he allowed himself a quiet, calculated thought. This isn't just a mess to clean. It's a challenge to overcome, a story that isn't over yet, and one that would demand cunning, patience, and perhaps a measure of poetic justice. The sisters may have thought they controlled the scene, but the man had already begun to turn the tide in his mind, plotting a response that they could never have anticipated. As the sun climbed higher, casting stark shadows along the driveway, the tension lingered, unresolved yet charged with potential. Cement, laughter, and rage hung in the morning air, and the audience could feel the quiet before the storm. The stage was set, the players defined, and the first move had been made, but the true game was only beginning. The man took a slow breath, his mind whirring with possibilities, and a subtle smirk hinted at the clever strategy forming behind his calm exterior. The sisters, oblivious to the storm gathering around them, continued their gloating, unaware that their day of reckoning was already in motion. The morning had stretched on, and the silver sedan remained trapped beneath its thick, gray shroud of cement, a grotesque monument to audacity. The air had grown warmer, carrying the mingling scents of concrete and freshly cut grass through the quiet cul-de-sac. The man stood a few feet away, his phone now recording the sisters' every movement, a silent witness to their brazen behavior. Barbara and Brenda were still laughing, though their amusement had begun to shift subtly, tinged with an unspoken awareness that he was documenting everything. It was a small fissure in their armor, barely noticeable, but enough to stir the calculation in his mind. He took a measured step forward, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Look, this isn't funny anymore. You've destroyed my property, and there are consequences for things like this." Barbara's laugh faltered briefly, and Brenda straightened, brushing off cement from her blouse as if to assert dominance, though her fingers trembled ever so slightly. "Consequences? Oh, please," Barbara said, rolling her eyes. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. A little cement never hurt anyone." She tipped her bucket casually, letting a few drops fall to the driveway with a soft plop. The man shook his head, suppressing the surge of anger threatening to break through. He had tried patience, tried reason, and now it was clear that none of it would work. These women thrived on chaos, on the sense of untouchable superiority that arrogance provides. He had to be smarter, subtler, more calculated. Every instinct told him that direct confrontation would only escalate their mockery, and the risk of losing control was too high. He glanced around the street. Neighbors peered cautiously from behind windows, some whispering, some just watching, uncertain whether to intervene or simply observe. He knew he needed evidence, proof that was indisputable, irrefutable. He pulled out his phone again, capturing close-ups of the cement-dripped surfaces, the sisters' faces frozen mid-laugh, the gleam of sunlight reflecting off the gray mass. Every frame mattered, every detail a potential weapon in the unfolding battle. Barbara noticed the renewed recording and squinted at him. "Seriously? You're still filming?" she asked, her voice holding a sharp edge beneath the laughter. "You think videos will save you? We did nothing wrong." Brenda, standing beside her, attempted to laugh it off but coughed slightly, a small tell of unease that hadn't been there before. The man kept his expression neutral, letting their doubts simmer. He had learned early on that pride was their weakness, the very thing that had fueled their cruelty. For weeks, he had observed the sisters, noting every overstep, every petty act of entitlement. They had blocked his driveway repeatedly, yelled at delivery drivers, and flaunted their disregard for neighborhood rules with impunity. Each act had been a brick in a wall of arrogance, and the cemented sedan was the crowning piece. But it had also been their mistake. They had underestimated him, assumed he would react with blind fury or submission. Instead, he had chosen calculation, observation, and strategy. He stepped closer to the car, running his fingers along the hardened surface, the texture gritty and uneven, yet still pliable enough in places to leave impressions of his touch. Every ridge, every drip was a marker of their audacity, but also a potential piece of evidence. He imagined how a judge would see this scene: two women gleefully laughing, a car ruined, the calculated arrogance of their gestures. It was damning, a narrative already written in cement and captured digitally. Barbara crossed her arms, watching him with a mix of amusement and growing irritation. Are you planning to cry now? Or is this going to be one of those long speeches about morality? Her tone was sarcastic, dripping with mockery, but beneath it lurked a hint of caution. Brenda laughed lightly, though it sounded forced, the natural rhythm of their performance slightly disrupted. The man didn't respond verbally. Instead, he catalogued every detail silently, knowing that patience was his ally and impulsivity his enemy. He considered his options carefully. Confrontation had failed. Persuasion had failed. There was only one path left, one that would turn the tables entirely in his favor. Social media, exposure, legal intervention, public humiliation. These were not just tools, but weapons in the hands of someone with strategy and resolve. He needed the sisters to underestimate him again, to believe that their arrogance remained unchallenged, so that when the consequences arrived, they would be complete and undeniable. Barbara shifted, tilting the bucket as if inviting another mess, and Brenda's gaze darted momentarily toward the street. That fleeting hesitation was all he needed to sense that the moment for action was approaching. The sisters thrived on spectacle, yet spectacle could be used against them. He imagined a scenario where their laughter would be immortalized, their arrogance documented, and their entitlement crushed by the very systems they had disrespected. He walked slowly toward the sidewalk, keeping a careful distance, phone still in hand, recording. The camera captured every laugh, every movement, every smirk. He spoke now, quietly, deliberately, ensuring that his voice carried just enough to be audible but not confrontational. You think you're untouchable, but arrogance has a price. Barbara frowned, a crease forming between her eyebrows for the first time, while Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. The subtle cracks in their confidence were visible, tiny but telling. Neighbors had begun to emerge, some stepping onto lawns, some leaning against fences, watching the unfolding scene with cautious curiosity. The man knew that witnesses would add weight to any claim he made later. This wasn't just about cement. It was about accountability, and the public would magnify the justice he intended to deliver. Every movement, every gesture was now part of a larger plan, a chessboard where he was several steps ahead. He paused, letting the sisters' laughter fill the air, then quietly tapped his phone, sending clips to a cloud storage folder, ensuring that nothing could be deleted or altered. Every frame, every sound, every moment of their arrogance was preserved. He imagined a courtroom, the judge's expression as the evidence played, the sisters' surprise when their smug confidence was shattered by incontrovertible proof. The thought brought a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the need for careful execution. Barbara tilted her head, sensing something in his demeanor she couldn't quite place. "Why are you so serious?" "It's just a car," she said, voice carrying both mockery and a hint of defensiveness. Brenda nodded, adding, "Yeah, can't we just laugh about it and move on?" Their laughter was lighter now, tinged with uncertainty. The man allowed a small, measured smile, one that revealed nothing but suggested he was already several moves ahead in his mind. He knew that the sisters' pride and sense of superiority could be turned into leverage. Their belief that they were untouchable would be their undoing. He envisioned the next steps, the call to authorities, the presentation of evidence, the witnesses ready to testify. Every element of the plan needed precision. One misstep and the balance could tip back in favor of the sisters' arrogance. But he felt a quiet confidence, knowing that patience and careful planning were his allies. As the morning progressed, the sisters' energy began to wane slightly, the initial rush of excitement giving way to the awareness that their antics were no longer without consequence. Barbara adjusted her stance, brushing off cement residue from her jeans, while Brenda shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the man as if re-evaluating her assumptions about his reaction. He remained calm, his eyes tracking every micro-expression, cataloging each movement, knowing that this information would be critical in the moments to come. He decided it was time to test the waters. "I'm going to call someone," he said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. Barbara snorted, amusement flashing in her eyes. "Call whoever you want. They won't care." Brenda chuckled, tilting her head, a slight edge of nervousness creeping into her tone. The man reached for his phone, dialed quickly, and let the call connect. He didn't speak aloud to the sisters, but their eyes caught the subtle movement, the slight pause, and a ripple of uncertainty passed between them. Their arrogance was still intact, but the first threads of doubt had begun to weave through their confidence. He imagined how this would play out. Law enforcement, evidence presented, the public record, each step designed to amplify the consequences of their prideful behavior. Barbara leaned slightly closer to Brenda, whispering something inaudible, a huddle of conspiring concern that went unnoticed by the man, but captured perfectly on camera. He continued recording, careful to preserve every whisper, every glance, every laugh turned nervous. This was not just documentation. It was the foundation of the justice he intended to secure. The sun climbed higher, the shadows of the houses stretching across the street. The cement on the sedan had begun to harden slightly, solidifying into a permanent reminder of the sisters' audacity. Yet the man's resolve remained fluid, adaptable, precise. He knew that patience, preparation, and strategic action were his greatest allies. The scene, chaotic as it seemed, was under his control, not because of brute force, but because of foresight, careful observation, and the exploitation of weakness. Barbara and Brenda continued to laugh occasionally, but the frequency had diminished, punctuated now by fleeting looks of apprehension. The man's calm demeanor, his methodical actions, and the quiet determination in his eyes had introduced an element they had not anticipated. He was no longer just a victim. He was an opponent, one who understood the rules of strategy and patience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended in the tension of a quiet street, he stepped back slightly, phone still recording, and allowed a small, deliberate pause to hang in the air. Barbara and Brenda exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. The man's mind raced, outlining the next phase: legal action, police involvement, public exposure, all designed to ensure that the arrogance displayed here would meet consequences far beyond their imagination. As the sisters continued to stand beside the cemented car, unaware of the storm gathering around them, the man allowed himself a small, controlled smile. The first move had been made, the board set, and the game had begun. The tension in the street was palpable, a quiet electricity humming between the figures, the cement, and the witnesses peeking from behind curtains and fences. The stage was set for a confrontation far more significant than the mess in the driveway. The man had discovered the leverage, understood the weakness, and prepared the strategy. Barbara and Brenda, still partially unaware of the consequences they were about to face, laughed one last time, their arrogance blinding them to the intricate trap forming around them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway, highlighting the gray surface of the cemented sedan, the smug yet faltering expressions of the sisters, and the resolute calm of the man. Every element of the scene spoke of anticipation, strategy, and the impending turn of events. The street was silent now, except for the faint dripping of concrete, a rhythm marking the slow march of time toward reckoning. The man pocketed his phone, taking a deep breath and surveying the street one last time. The sisters had unknowingly provided every element he needed for the next stage. His mind raced, outlining the sequence that would ensure justice, public humiliation, and the poetic payoff they deserved. The cemented car was no longer a disaster. It was a tool, a catalyst, a prelude to the coming storm. Barbara adjusted her stance, brushing her hair back, a fleeting tension in her shoulders unnoticed by most, but Reed perfectly by him. Brenda glanced toward the sidewalk, her curiosity now laced with the first threads of concern. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, focus sharpened, as he silently calculated the timing and execution of his next moves. In that suspended moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. Cement, arrogance, and anticipation hung heavy in the air. The man's calm exterior concealed the strategic mind at work, the plan meticulously forming, ready to transform chaos into retribution. The sisters, still partially oblivious, laughed one final time, setting the stage for a reckoning that would be as satisfying as it was inevitable. By late afternoon, the quiet suburban street had transformed into a stage for consequences long overdue. The silver sedan, still encased in a thick, gray layer of cement, gleamed dully under the slanting sunlight, every drip and ridge a testament to the sisters' audacity. Barbara and Brenda had begun to sense that the morning's chaos was no longer theirs to control. Their laughter, once bold and gloating, had diminished to nervous chuckles and tense glances. Each subtle movement betrayed the realization that the man across from them was no longer merely a victim, but an opponent, one with patience, foresight, and a plan that would ensure their arrogance met its reckoning. The man stood a short distance from the car, phone still in hand, now not just recording, but transmitting evidence directly to the authorities. The act felt strangely empowering, a quiet satisfaction coursing through him, as he watched the sisters' confidence fracture imperceptibly. Barbara shifted her weight, glancing at Brenda with a flicker of unease in her eyes. Brenda's hands fidgeted at her sides, her fingers brushing absent-mindedly against her cement-splattered blouse. They had been used to control and mockery. Now, the tide had turned, and the uncertainty gnawed at them. A distant siren broke the tension like a crack of thunder. The sisters froze, heads snapping toward the sound, the once bold smirks faltering. The man remained calm, his chest rising and falling steadily, a stark contrast to the rising panic on the faces before him. "I'd suggest enjoying your morning while it lasts," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of irony that cut sharper than any shout. Barbara opened her mouth to retort, but the words caught in her throat as a police cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing but sirens subdued to avoid alarming neighbors. Officers emerged swiftly, methodical and professional, their eyes assessing the scene. The cemented sedan, the two women frozen in place, and the man standing with quiet authority, all presented a tableau of undeniable guilt. Barbara's mouth opened again, a protest forming, but the lead officer raised a hand, silencing her without a word. Brenda's knees buckled slightly as reality set in. The thrill of the morning had evaporated, replaced by the heavy weight of impending accountability. The man watched, satisfaction simmering beneath the surface, as the sisters' arrogance was systematically dismantled by the very forces they had ignored in their hubris. Evidence was laid out quickly, photographs, video clips, and neighbor testimonies forming an airtight case. The officers moved with efficiency, reading the sisters their rights and gently but firmly escorting them toward the cruiser. Barbara's protests grew louder, a high-pitched stream of indignation and panic. Brenda clung to her sister's arm, voice quivering as she tried to regain some semblance of composure. The man remained calm, observing the breakdown, each protest a confirmation of the effectiveness of careful strategy over impulsive rage. The neighbors began to gather, some cautiously stepping onto lawns, others peering from behind fences, all witnessing the public unraveling of two individuals who had thought themselves untouchable. Cameras quietly clicked as onlookers documented the moment, reinforcing the man's sense of poetic justice. Barbara glared at him, fury and disbelief contorting her face. Brenda's gaze flickered between him and the officers, desperation in her eyes. Their collective realization was brutal and immediate. The morning's audacity had been a fatal miscalculation. Hours later, the courtroom provided a stage for the final act. The man sat quietly, reviewing the evidence on his phone while the sisters were ushered in, their confidence replaced with apprehension. The judge's gaze swept over the room, sharp and commanding. The presentation of evidence was meticulous, video clips capturing the cement pouring, photographs of the damage, witness statements attesting to the sisters' behavior. The narrative was clear, undeniable, and damning. Barbara and Brenda exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier arrogance crumbling under the weight of irrefutable proof. When the verdict was read, the courtroom held its breath. The judge's voice rang clear, delivering a judgment that would ensure consequences both practical and poetic. The sisters were fined, their arrogance legally punished, and in a move that stunned the room, their new Tesla, acquired only months prior, was awarded to the man as part of restitution. Gasps echoed in the chamber, whispers spreading through the audience. Barbara's jaw fell, disbelief mirrored in Brenda's wide-eyed stare. They had not anticipated such a decisive, public, and complete reversal of fortune. The man felt a quiet thrill, tempered by the gravity of the courtroom. Justice had been served not with vengeance, but with precision, leveraging patience, evidence, and strategy. The Tesla, now his, gleamed in the sunlight as it was processed through the legal formalities, a symbol of the sisters' downfall and a tangible testament to the power of clever action over impulsive retribution. Barbara and Brenda were led away, heads hung low, their pride shattered and replaced with a raw awareness of their own misjudgment. Outside, the man surveyed the street where it had all begun. The silver sedan still bore its thick coat of cement, hardened now into a permanent monument to the sisters' folly, while the new Tesla stood gleaming nearby, a tangible reward for his patience and strategic thinking. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some offering congratulations, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the audacity and the outcome. The man allowed himself a small, wry smile, the satisfaction of poetic justice warming him without tipping into arrogance. As he approached the Tesla, he ran his hand along its pristine surface, reflecting briefly on the chain of events. Each step had required calm observation, deliberate action, and a refusal to be provoked into rash decisions. The cement-coated sedan, the laughing sisters, the strategic documentation, and the court proceedings had all been pieces in a carefully orchestrated plan. The success lay not in force or fury, but in foresight and precise execution. Barbara and Brenda, now outside the courtroom and escorted to awaiting vehicles, exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Their morning had begun with confidence, arrogance, and laughter, yet it ended with humiliation, legal consequences, and the loss of possessions. The man had turned their own behavior into the catalyst for justice, exploiting their weaknesses without ever losing his composure. The public nature of their downfall, witnessed by neighbors, police, and the court, added a layer of humiliation that no private scolding could achieve. Walking toward his cement-coated sedan one last time, the man considered the absurdity of the day. The air still carried a faint, sharp scent of concrete, now hardened into a permanent reminder. He crouched to inspect the hardened ridges, running fingers along the surface, and imagined the morning laughter echoing faintly in memory, replaced now by silence, consequence, and reflection. The cement, once a symbol of destruction, had become a marker of strategy, patience, and eventual triumph. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the driveway, he glanced at the sisters' new Tesla, now legally his. It gleamed with an almost ironic brilliance, a trophy of calculated justice that contrasted sharply with the gray, hardened sedan. Barbara and Brenda, their faces flushed with anger and disbelief, were led away, their posture slumped, their prior confidence replaced with the stark reality of consequences they could not avoid. The man's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile, not of gloating, but of completion. The tension of weeks and the chaos of the morning finally resolved in a decisive, undeniable manner. Yet even as the street quieted, the day's drama resolved in the most spectacular fashion. The man knew that life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges. The cemented sedan and the Tesla were symbols of victory, yes, but also reminders that vigilance, patience, and clever thinking were essential tools in navigating a world filled with entitlement and audacity. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, knowing that while this battle was over, life's unpredictability meant that the next challenge could arrive at any moment. Neighbors returned to their routines, the street slowly returning to its typical quiet hum, though the memory of the spectacle lingered. Children whispered to each other about the cemented car, adults exchanged incredulous glances, and somewhere a camera phone clicked, capturing one more angle of the morning's chaos. The man walked between the two cars, surveying the results of both destruction and justice, and felt a sense of equilibrium settle over him. The world, for a moment, was righted through patience, strategy, and the careful application of consequences. Barbara and Brenda were still a block away, escorted by officers, their conversation muted but frantic. The man allowed himself a final glance over his shoulder, imagining their astonishment at the full scope of their downfall, the total reversal of fortune that had been set in motion by their own hubris. The cemented sedan remained a testament to audacity gone too far, the Tesla a trophy of strategic patience, and he understood fully the lesson etched into the day. Arrogance unchecked will always meet consequence, and cleverness, foresight, and calm resolve are tools more powerful than rage. The street settled into quiet once again, the shadows stretching long across the driveway. The man approached the Tesla one final time, fingers brushing the smooth surface, and allowed a small, ironic chuckle to escape. Justice had been served, the sisters had been humbled, and the morning's chaos had been transformed into triumph. Yet the day remained open-ended, life inevitably promising more challenges, more tests of patience and cleverness. The cement, the laughter, the court, and the triumph were all part of a story that would linger in memory, a narrative of audacity, consequence, and the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly.